begin. We must do that.
Yes, go.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this afternoon's meeting of the New Right. As you can tell, I'm not Jonathan Bowden. The staff car carrying the Rights Minister of Culture has been lost somewhere in a snowdrift between Reading and London and seems at present unlikely to arrive. So you'll have to make do with me standing in here. Thank you all very much for coming here. In a display of what I call nationalist punctuality, the 12:30 meeting is now going to kick off at 1:45. And while we have lost a couple of speakers, a couple of us are going to volunteer our services to entertain you this afternoon. But first and foremost, the speaker who I'm sure many of you have been looking forward to hearing this afternoon, Al Barron. Now, Al is a remarkable man, and remarkable to me for a number of reasons, one of which is that he's someone who I happen to have met through another world than the world of politics. Al is too modest to tell you this himself, but in his day, he was a very well-known amateur chess player of considerable talent. He was competing at a high level in tournaments, and a number of whose games have been published in various chess periodicals and magazines. Chess is an interest of mine, so I was fascinated to come across Al in that world, as well as this one, if I can put it that way. But he's probably best known as a journalist and author. He's really a man who's made his life's work to expose the machinations, lies, libels, perjuries, deceits and crimes of Jerry Gable, and that is a subject to which a man could easily dedicate his whole life. Find that at the end of it he hadn't really given the material full and sufficient adequate treatment. But Al has done his best, and we also have the pleasure of having in the audience Mark Taha, who, together with Al, inflicted upon Searchlight perhaps the most embarrassing defeat that magazine has ever suffered, but it was forced not only to pay out some damages to Mark, in a sum which, although not enormous, was not trivial either, it was a 4-figure sum, but also forced to write out a much larger cheque for the costs, which certain malicious people circulated around Searchlight's friends in the trade union movement, the Labour Party and elsewhere, and told them that so far from their donations to Searchlight going into the anti-fascist struggle, they were going to pay the costs of people who Jerry didn't like and had libelled in his magazine. It's apparently called Jerry to have near apoplectic fit, because of course, like someone else I could mention but won't, he likes people to press the donate button frequently and for large amounts. Yes, I can't think. It's lost on me. Al, as I say, has been a prolific writer. A number of his books are on sale today, and I can particularly recommend Liars Ought to Have Good Memories, which is a book that anyone who had ever had anything to do with Searchlight magazine should read, treasure, and keep on their bookshelf. He's a very brave man who's been subject to attempts at intimidation from Jerry and his little helpers. He is here today to speak to us on a very rare outing. I'm sorry to say that Al's health is not what it was, and he has struggled up from South London in the snow. I hope you'll give him a big round of applause to welcome him here and listen to attention to what he has to say.
The biggest liar who ever walked the earth. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. The subject of this dissertation, although odious in the extreme, is one dear to my heart. He's a man to whom I owe much. Because not only did he in supports pay me a considerable sum of money, although admittedly not out of the milk of human kindness, but he has enabled me to build something of a reputation, and to build that reputation at the expense of diminishing his. January 27th is remembered with fondness by many Jewish people of a certain age because it's the date Auschwitz was liberated. A date to celebrate, but it's also a date which marks a great tragedy for the Jews because on January 27th, 1937, Gerald Clark Gable was born. Mr. Gable, better known to you as Jerry Gable and to me as lying kosher scum, was the co-founder of, and at times editor and publisher of, Searchlight magazine. This hate sheet is often alluded to with good reason as Gable's fables. That reason being that much of what has gone into it over the years has been manufactured by his sick Jewish mind and the equally sick minds of his mostly Goy collaborators. The information I shall impart to you here, though, will be 100% factual and, like the bulk of my publications, researched almost entirely from the public domain. So if you're suspicious of my general veracity or any part of my speech, you can, with a little effort, confirm that what I say is the gospel truth. I will here and there venture an opinion, but as is usually the case, it will be clearly discernible as opinion and will not be dressed up as proven fact. In 1993-4, I brought 2 libel actions against Jerry Gable and his magazine, and his printer, and his distributor, and a number of Searchlight's retail outlets. This was an action he did everything in his power to wriggle out of. But when he was able to wriggle no more, we exchanged witness statements. His witness statement is a truly remarkable document, dated 7th to the 4th, 97, running to 170 paragraphs and nearly 44 pages. It contains much which is undoubtedly untrue, much which cannot be verified, at least not by me, and I've no doubt that he was advised by his experienced legal team to curtail this statement drastically, but fortunately for posterity he did not. If you thought the Balfour Declaration was a remarkable document, or the Protocols of Zion, trust me, I ain't got nothing on this one. As we all know, most Jews are highly educated and literate, so it should come as no surprise that at paragraph 38 Mr. Gable says, "I attended part-time courses at the London School of Economics. This was between 1958 and 1959, when I was around 22 years of age. I obtained a diploma in social history." Curious that, because in a letter dated 10th of September 1998, Catherine Murray of the LSE's Alumni Relations team wrote, "Thank you for your letter of 1st of September 1998 regarding Mr. Gerald Clark Gable. I'm writing to inform you that we do not have a record of anyone with that name in our alumni database. Furthermore, to the best of my knowledge, the LSE did not run a course for a diploma in social history in 1958-59. That being the case, I was inclined to treat with some suspicion 2 of his other claims to academic prowess. The claim that he holds a professorship in American journalism and that he has an MA in criminology. Incredible though it may seem, both these claims are true, which does rather lead one to pity the state of American journalism. I tried to obtain access to his master's thesis. I'm sure it would make fascinating reading and even more fascinating analysis, but Middlesex University would not permit this. Sigh. It is though well known that he has indeed lectured at the Hendon Police College, Britain's police being amongst the most liberal and politically correct of our citizens. They will doubtless have approved of his views on race and race relations. Perhaps in his lectures on tolerance, he echoed the sentiments of the late Bernie Grant that they'd received a bloody good hiding during the Broadwater Farm riot, where PC Blakelock had his head hacked off. Then again, perhaps not. At paragraph 138 of his witness statement, Mr. Gable shows that he can dish it out, but he can't take it because he says of me, "I have worked on investigations against the mafia, war criminals and Nazis of all shapes and sizes, but I have never before come up against anything like the behaviour of Alexander Mr. Barron." So it's true, the pen really is mightier than the submachine gun. Get real. Okay, I'm flattered, but is this really an intelligent thing to say? I mean, the mafia, war criminals, come on. All I've ever done is compare what he says and does with what actually happened and broadcast it to the world. Okay, I did write a poem about his 4th son, yeah? and one or two other things. But if he and she had been honest about her antecedents, I wouldn't have had so much ammunition. As I'm sure many of you know, during her youth, the former Sonia Hochfelder was a member of the National Front and of the League of St George, although of Jewish extraction. She was a right-wing extremist and committed racial nationalist. I came across her maiden name when I went through Searchlight's accounts, which are filed at Company's House. The name Hochfelder rang a bell, as they say. It came as a big surprise to me to find that Jerry Gable, as obsessive and anti-Nazi as they come, and of course a Jew, was actually married to a woman who, in his parlance, was a Nazi. And of course, once a Nazi, always a Nazi. Now, in the real world, leopards do change their spots, especially when they've been young and foolish. If the Gables had come clean about this, no one would have held it against them, not even me. But instead they concocted a ludicrous story about her being some sort of kosher Mata Hari. Well, sorry, she wasn't. Mr. Gables also accused me of stalking him and his family. This phrase is a relatively new invention of the media and the legal authorities, but what does it mean exactly? In this case, it means researching him. Well, he certainly researched me, and he even posted an advertisement in Searchlight requesting information on my background. And among other things, he found out I was adopted. True, I never made any secret of this, or much of my personal background, such as it is, but if I stalked him, then by the same definition, he stalked me. For the record, I never found out anything about my own father, although apparently he was a Belgian national and died either shortly before or after I was born. But I better luck researching your family, Jerry. As I pointed out, Randy Jerry has been married no less than 4 times, and it seems the apple didn't fall far from the tree, because on May the 31st, 1923, the 19-year-old Rebecca Levy, daughter of Taylor Morris Levy and herself a draper shop assistant of 268 Hackney Road, married 21-year-old Albert Keller at East London Synagogue. And on January 19th, 1928, Sir Maurice Hill of the High Court dissolved her marriage because naughty Jewish girl Rebecca was said to have frequently committed adultery with the Goy Walter Gable. Well, you can call that stalking if you wish, but I prefer to call it research. Nowadays, of course, in the age of Google and Facebook, it's easy as pie for any of us to find out background information on almost anyone else. It's a pity no one told the Duchess of York. But to return to the pre-Facebook age, on March the 16th, 1995, Jerry and his lovely wife Sonia appeared on BBC Radio 4's soundtrack programme, where he was quite candid about his stalking activities, if I might call them that, such as following people, looking them up on the electoral register and so on. Similar activities, including covert photographs, can be found in countless back numbers of his hate sheet. Again, sauce for the goose, but apparently not for the goyim. At paragraph 160 of his witness statement, 160, Mr. Gable writes, "In 34 years of working in this field, I think Mr. Barron's material is by far some of the most vicious and offensive I've ever seen. Mr. Barron must know what hurt he causes by his outpourings." Well, I have to plead guilty to that one, Jerry, because I find it difficult to be anything but vicious and offensive with regard to one particular lie of yours that I was to spend 15 years of my life refuting. This is a lie which exposes Mr. Gable not as a champion of tolerance, racial or otherwise, and certainly not as a friend of the Jews, but as a cynical exploiter of Jewish suffering, real and imagined. Way back in 1994, 16 years ago, can you believe that, Troy? I published a pamphlet called A Revisionist History of the 1960s Synagogue Artisans. The third and what I considered the definitive edition of the short monograph was published in 2002. You can download both a scan of the second edition and an HTML version of the third edition with additional documentation from my Searchlight Archive website. In October 1987, the Jewish Chronicle published a now notorious interview with Gable in which the gullible David Winner painted a hagiographic portrait of this valiant Jewish anti-fascist, where inter alia he related how he had brought to book a gang of arsonists in the 1960s. Not only were they arsonists, but wicked Nazis. One might also have concluded they were murderers, because one of the fires they set was said to have caused the death of a yeshiva student. Of course, the police, being totally incompetent, if not anti-Semitic, were unable to progress the inquiry, but Gable brought the entire gang to justice. He told David Winner, "I stood in a burned out shell of that yeshiva at 4 in the morning and made a private vow to get the people who'd done that.
Careful of your mic.
Super Jew!" Able to leap tall 10 bagels at a single bound. Heroic stuff. But when my colleague Mark Taha and I went through back issues of Searchlight with a fine-tooth comb, we found a somewhat different account. This was an obituary that Gable had written for one of his kosher buddies, a man named Harry Bidney. In his full-page spread, he lauded Bidney as his hero. There is an old Chinese proverb, man who owns a watch knows time. Man who owns 2 watches is never certain. There is, of course, a third possibility. Both watches may be wrong, especially when they were manufactured in Israel rather than Hong Kong. So I went through back issues of the Jewish Chronicle, and a few years later, after the relevant documents had been declassified, I went through the original police and DPP files at the Public Record Office. This is a long story, but I will keep it brief. In the 1960s, there was indeed a series of arson attacks in Greater London, which were directed against Jewish premises. This campaign was incited by Mrs. Francoise Jordan, the fanatically anti-Semitic wife of the British Nazi leader Colin Jordan. There were 2 gangs, both of young men whom she had seduced ideologically, and if anything could be said in their favour is that they went out of their way to ensure that only property was damaged. The gangs were brought to book when one of the more youthful members had a change of heart and decided to turn himself in and shot the rest. And to that end he approached Gable's hero, who took him to the police, but not before he had first attempted to frame the hapless Colin Jordan as the mastermind behind the fires. There was indeed a fire at the yeshiva, the Masifta Talmudical College, Casino Road, in the heart of Jewish London. That fire led to the death of a trainee rabbi and to another student suffering terrible injuries. I actually spoke to the survivor, Judah Gottesman, many years ago. Tragic though this fire was, it happened before Mrs. Jordan launched her short but unsettling reign of terror. It was thoroughly investigated by the police and was ruled by the coroner to have been an accident. Disgusted that Gable had fabricated not only a hate crime, but a murder to boost his prestige and to quite cynically and shamefully exploit the death of a pious young Jew, I churned out my exposés. I even sent a copy of one of these publications to the Jewish Chronicle. I had expected this august organ of British Jewry to take him to task at the very least. Alas. Regardless of my ongoing exposés, Gable continued to peddle this vile lie about this accidental fire. And in April of last year, when Colin Jordan died, that other august organ, the Guardian newspaper, commissioned him, of all people, to write Jordan's obituary. And of course he repeated this lie yet again. That didn't surprise me, but I was both surprised and disgusted when the Guardian refused to repudiate it, and in fact kill-filed me. So I took it to the Press Complaints Commission, which the paper also ignored, and although it did eventually agree to publish a somewhat limited qualification. I wasn't entirely happy with this, but realised it was probably as good as I would get. I told the PCC to acquiesce. Then I had another bright idea. If the coroner had ruled the Masifta fire to have been an accident, and Mr. Gable insisted that it wasn't, perhaps this was not simply a matter for the PCC, but for an organisation with real teeth. So on July 10th last year, I wrote to the police commissioner suggesting that Mr. Gable be questioned in relation to his withholding evidence about a 45-year-old murder. Obviously this was not a pressing matter, so the police took their time, but in a letter dated 29th of September 2009, Detective Superintendent John Sweeney, yes, Sweeney, replied to my letter and follow-up letter to the effect that, quote, Mr. Gable has been spoken to and does not claim to be personally in possession of any information, any evidence relating to the Masifta fire. There will not be a reinvestigation. unquote. That letter has been scanned and placed in the public domain. You will find it on archive.org under details / murder squad exposed Gable as lying filth. It's a pity that's the only such document that's been made public. Wouldn't you just love to have been a fly in the wall during that encounter? Ding dong! Tonya, it's the doorbell. I'll answer you, my hero. You finish your bacon bagel. Be careful, Tonya. It might be one of those antithelmitics like the postman. Don't be silly, Jerry. Our postman isn't anti-Semitic. Then why does he keep delivering us hate mail? Jerry, it's two men wearing size 11 boots and they're desperate for your assistance to solve a hate crime. There are always two of them, as you know, tits come in pairs. The clods walk into Sonia's kosher kitchen and flash their warrant cards. Hello, Mr. Gable. We are the Sweeney. At least he is. Da-da-da, da-da-da. Oy vey. Always glad to help the boys in blue. Even after that incident in 1947. And that other incident, the one with the doorknob. And that one at Kensington Library. And that time I was banned from lecturing at Hendon. What can I do for you guys? Now, Mr. Gable, we are investigating a fire at a Jewish college. I thought that was tomorrow night, Jerry. Tonya, please. That's enough of this. We have received information from Mr. Alexander Barron that you may be able to help us with our inquiries into a fire way back in December 1964. We've spoken to the St Pancras coroner, and our inquiries, this fire was recorded as accidental, but we understand you have information to the following, to the contrary. Barron, that Nazi. Yes, Mr. Gable, but Mr. Barron says, you can't believe the word he says, he's Gaga. Yes, Mr. Gable, and an anti-Semitic. That may be the case, sir, but we have received information and we are obliged to investigate this allegation that, I hope you're not an anti-Semitic too. Mr. Gable, this is a potential murder investigation. Now, if you don't want to answer our questions here, perhaps you'd like to speak to your solicitor and arrange to answer them at New Scotland Yard. Under caution. Like about. I think I'm going to faint. Now, we believe you have information that the 1964 Masifta fire, college fire, was arson. Is that indeed the case? Well, not really. He wants a t-shirt. I can wool once and see me afterwards. You mean not at all? No. No what, Mr. Gable? No, it was not arson at all. I only said it was. Why did you say that? It was meant to be a joke. A joke? You think the death of a trainee rabbi is funny? Not half as funny as your American accent. In this hole we watch the Bill, not CSI. Now, there are all manner of conclusions one may draw from this sordid affair. One is that if Gable and his ilk can't be trusted to tell the truth about one Jewish death, how can they be trusted to tell the truth about 6 million? I'll return to that, but first I would like briefly to run through some of his and Searchlight's other scams. Although I published more exposés of Searchlight than anyone else, and can probably use this for my master's thesis, I'm far from the only person to have exposed him, and it. I was not even the first. Anarchists have always been suspicious of Searchlight, although they misinterpret its perfidy as being some sort of front for MI5. The New Statesman published 2 exposés of Gable back in the 1980s. Larry O'Hara has also written critically about both him and the Finance organisation, although he has taken his assertions, assumptions and speculations to ludicrous extremes. Other elements of the left have also been suspicious of both him and it. But it was not until they were hitting their wallets that they decided to dump Searchlight. My label action, the subsequent actions of my colleague Mark Taha, and the spectacular success of the late Maurice Riley have led to its being virtually impossible to obtain over the counter in radical quote-unquote bookshops nationwide. One of the first scams pulled off by Searchlight was the Column 88 Nazi underground hoax. This was said to have been a veritable terrorist army that was prepared to wreak mayhem and murder the length and breadth of the country. It turned out to be what was described by the Minister of State for Defence as a small drinking club of neo-Nazi nutcases. In early issues of Searchlight magazine, Column 88 was portrayed as a menace to Britain comparable with the IRA. Then years later, Gable and Searchlight claimed it had been a honey trap organisation operated by British intelligence, just like that. I'll give you a precise citation for that. Searchlight, April 1993, issue 214, page 11. Yet, curiously, a mere 2 years earlier, Gable had claimed in an essay contributed to the book Neo-Fascism in Europe that John Tyndall was ousted from the leadership of the National Front because he'd reneged on his oath of allegiance to Column 88, in which he'd been inducted at the tender age of 19. What are we to make of this? Are we supposed to believe the leader of the BNP is working for the secret state? It's previous leader, not the current one. Rubbish like this has found its way not just into the left press and the mainstream media, but into the halls of academia and the corridors of power. Gullible activists, journalists, academics, police officers and powerful politicians read this garbage and even base public policy on Gable's lies and nonsense. It isn't even though it's well thought out lies and nonsense. Gable is simply making it up as he goes along. And if you don't agree, if you dissent or perish the thought, if you expose his lies, well, you can only be an anti-Semite. Then, of course, there was the Notting Hill Carnival bomb plot, another total fabrication, and one worked in collaboration with his Shabbos Goy Ray Hill, a man who was attracted to the verboten cause of white racial nationalism for all the wrong reasons, a man who hated Jews virulently, but suddenly decided they weren't such bad chaps after all, and the more money they gave him, the more wonderful he thought they were. I could say much more about Gable's dirty work, but I would like to pose a question which, if often asked, is seldom answered correctly. Why? Is it because he's motivated by ideology? Is he a Marxist, perhaps? No. Is it because the Searchlight organisation is a front for Larry O'Hara's ubiquitous secret state? No. Is it then simply that Searchlight is a money-making scam? No. Is it because Jerry Gable is a Jew, part of the all-pervasive international Jewish conspiracy, perhaps? No, not that either. There is another reason, a far simpler reason, and one that few of Searchlight's detractors and no one in the halls of academia even considers. That reason can be summed up in 2 words: racial hatred. This is something everyone in the world can recognise when it comes garbed in pointed hats and white sheets chanting niggers out, or wearing swastika armbands and crying Juden raus, or when the cry Aloha Akbar issues from the lips of a suicide bomber moments before he blows both himself and a few dozen of us heathens to kingdom come. Most people even acknowledge it when the Israelis murder innocent Palestinians, wherein it's usually referred to as anti-Arab racism or simply racism. But there is another type of racial hatred, the unconditional hatred of a certain type of Jew for the society he holds responsible for the historical persecution of his race. Final solution, gas chambers and all. But this racial hatred is far, far more than an understandable extreme overreaction to the excesses of Nazism, or to the racial anti-Semitism that reared its ugly head in Germany with the founding of the Anti-Semitic League by Wilhelm Marr in 1879. Rather, it is a visceral, almost primeval hatred. The conspiracy literature is replete with manifestations of this hatred, where it's always misrepresented either as some sort of bizarre Talmudic plot, or as an international conspiracy by wealthy Jews intent on destroying the white race as part and parcel of their plan to enslave the world. The conspiracy theorists may miss the mark as far as the Jewish religion is concerned, but they're not that far off being with regard to certain other members of the kosher crew. If you study the involvement of Jews with so-called revolutionary movements from the 19th century to date, you'll see that it's not, and when I say not, I mean never, the religious Jews, the Torah-true Jews, who cause all the trouble. Even modern Zionism, which might just be construed as a Jewish ideology, was founded in the first instance by racial rather than religious Jews. In fact, if you speak with Torah-true Jews, they will tell you that Zionism is a worldwide Jewish conspiracy, a worldwide conspiracy, the goal of which is to transform the Jews from a religious community into a nation. I seldom say so on the record. So what is the goal of the Jerry Gables of this world? It's quite simply to kill you, Whitey, not with the direct approach of the aforementioned Islamist suicide bomber, but by subversion from within, promoting non-white immigration into the white nations of the world, what is left of them, promoting abortions for whites, so-called gay rights, and most of all by brainwashing the next generation into accepting miscegenation and ultimately racial death. If this sounds like paranoia, we've only to look around to see what is actually happening, because that's precisely what is happening. Immigration, falling white birth rates, brainwashing and racial death. If you look closely, you will even find direct evidence of this racial hatred in back issues of Searchlight, when occasionally the mask slips. One of the major hate figures of Searchlight and similar organisations, including the misnamed Anti-Defamation League, is the Nation of Islam. In particular, that organisation's charismatic leader, Louis Farrakhan. Normally, Jewish and leftist organisations crawl up to black organisations of any kind, but not to Minister Farrakhan. For them, he is a hate figure. Why? Because his organisation promotes black self-determination, black social responsibility, and black separatism. In 1979, Searchlight published a pamphlet called Women in the National Front. This was written ostensibly by the shiksa Veronica Ware, who would later edit the magazine briefly. It was almost certainly written by Morris Ludmer, the racial Jew who, along with Jerry Gable, founded Searchlight magazine and was its head honcho until his sudden death in 1981. It was probably Ludmer as much as Gable and Ray Hill who was responsible for setting up the Notting Hill Carnival bomb hoax, although he died just as it came to fruition. Women in the National Front is a thinly veiled plea for miscegenation. A similar, somewhat more direct plea was made by Gable himself in the pamphlet War with Society, although he put it into the mouth of Tim Heppel. The very same plea can be found in a book called Racism, which was published posthumously in 1938. At page 265 we find the sinister phrase, "Mankind a unity to begin with, and destined to become a unity once more." This book appears to be the first time the word racism appeared in print. The author, who died in 1935, was one Magnus Hirschfeld, and yes, he was another one, yet another one. It would, though, be wrong to tar Hirschfeld with the same brush as Gable, simply on account of their shared ethnicity. An examination of Hirschfeld's motives indicates that while he was clearly deceiving himself on race issues, he was not entirely evil. The same cannot be said for Jerry Gable, who is. Although he advocated miscegenation by the now time-honoured tactic of denying the very existence of race, Hirschfeld also did pioneering work on sexual aberrations and advocated tolerance for an understanding of those so afflicted, such as homosexuals. But Jerry Gable's idea of tolerance is very different. It involves lying persistently, if not consistently, to all and sundry, including his own kind, and lying about all and sundry. It includes making common cause with the likes of Ray Hill, an avowed anti-Semite and racial bigot, and inciting less sophisticated white racial nationalistic, a bit criminal acts in order to demonise and even to prescribe the entire movement, and lobbying for yet further restrictions on freedom of speech in order, ostensibly, to protect the very communities he has exploited and betrayed. The most astonishing thing I found in my documenting the perfidy of Jerry Gable and his gang is that they've been so remarkably easy to expose. There's been no great detective work involved by and large. As the saying goes, it ain't rocket science. If I can do it, so can anyone else. Certainly anyone who works in the media, or so you would think. Again, alas, in December of last year, Gabriel and his wife were interviewed by John Gulliver of the Camden New Journal. And in this interview, he claimed quite brazenly and shamelessly to have, well, let Mr. Gulliver tell you. He did tell me, however, he had been able to provide the police with intelligence on the gay bar bombings in Soho that helped the police send the perpetrator to jail. This is clearly a reference to David Copeland. I'm sure that most, if not everybody in this room, is au fait with the actual circumstances which led to Copeland's arrest. He was captured on CCTV and identified by a workmate, Paul Mifsud. This was a massive story at the time. Certainly anyone of a certain age who lived in London and paid the slightest attention to the local or national media would have known about the CCTV, if not the name of the witness. Yet this muppet of a journalist is clearly incapable of doing the most basic fact-checking. Perhaps he was afraid if he did, he'd have been branded anti-Semitic. I wrote to the paper pointing out this gross factual error, stroke lie, but they didn't bother to acknowledge my letter, much less publish it. To me, that just about sums up the mass media where Gabriel and his gang, and indeed his kind, are concerned. They simply lie through their teeth and are parroted uncritically. I have to say this is not unique to self-styled anti-fascists and anti-racists, but the fact that the lies and poison of hate-mongers like Jerry Gabriel is largely swallowed uncritically by the mass media, and often by other institutions as well, is one of the reasons Britain, and indeed the world, is in such a terrible state. If Gabriel and his gang had his way, I would be silenced. We would all be silenced. It was scum like him, Jew and Gentile, who started all this no-platform hysteria. It is him and scum like him who have been responsible for extending it and for perverting not only the rules of debate, but the rule of law within the framing of draconian so-called race relations and similar legislation, which has been used in Britain in a completely arbitrary fashion to persecute people who have the temerity to oppose their tyranny, and which in Germany and other countries has been used to silence those who dare to expose their state-sanctioned lies. I will say too something about Jerry Gabriel that does not necessarily apply to similar fanatics, Jew and Gentile. He is clearly insane. This is not intended to be a humorous or polemical observation, but an objective one. Gabriel appears to have a unique ability to believe two mutually exclusive facts simultaneously. To give just one example, in his witness statement in Riley v. Gable and others, he claimed Morris was a Walter Mitty character who fantasised about being a spy. Later in the same statement, he claimed to have followed him covertly to the headquarters of the security services and said that he walked through a door unchallenged. In other words, he wants to have his cake and eat it. I think it is not too big a leap from there to his believing that Column 88 was both a secret Nazi underground and a state honey trap. And it may be that he is so delusional that he truly believes he solved a murder that never happened. We have a word for people who have such a loose grip on reality, and we call them psychotic. Nowadays, scum like Gable, and that is what he is, mad or sane, scum like him are not able to have it all their own way, which is a major reason they hate the internet. Because by and large, cyberspace is beyond their control, beyond anybody's control. Above all else, we must ensure we do not lose the internet. But internet or not, the struggle must go on until we've flushed Gable and his infernal organisation down the toilet and into the sewers of history where they belong. And I'll say one last thing about Jerry Gable, the Jewish Chronicle, the Anti-Defamation League. They brand us and people like us anti-Semites. But I'd like to finish the speech with a question and appeal. I'd like to put this question to any and every member of the Jewish establishment. Do people hate Jews because of me, you, people like us? Or do they hate Jews because of Gabriel and his ilk? Which is the truly evil act? To claim a Jew was murdered during an arson campaign, or to expose this as a lie? Which is the truly evil act? To recruit scum like Ray Hill to incite hatred and violence, or to expose Hill and his manipulators? Which is the truly evil act? To libel a nation with a claim that 6 million Jews were murdered during the Holocaust, or to point out the self-evident fact that a delousing chamber is not a homicidal gas chamber any more than as a shower bath? In short, is the true enemy of the Jew, the anti-Semite, real and imagined, or someone much closer to home?
Well, ladies and gentlemen, I think that was a remarkable tour de force, an extraordinary expose of the Searchlight organisation. I hope that this speech is going to be preserved in print and also in video form for the benefit of future viewers and readers. We're going to take a short break now, and others will attempt to reach some part of the high standard reached by Al in his presentation later on this afternoon. Thank you very much.